Hey, Joe Gilder here. Welcome back to another edition of Mix Together. In this video, as promised, we're going to work on our mix bus processing, engage that, and if we have time, we'll even dive into some other things that I've been dying to do to this mix. So, we've got our static mix done, and as I mentioned before, we're going to spend our time over here. This is my mix bus, my main output, master fader, as you Pro Tools folk call it. But Studio One, and you may notice over this series, I'm probably most likely going to use all stock plugins throughout this series because that's just what I do. That's how I mix. I may change that tune and that'll be fine, but for now they're working fine for me. So Studio One has this console shaper feature, which is essentially, if you're familiar with Steven Slate, the Virtual Console Collection, that type of stuff that is intended to put on all your tracks, or at least on all your buses, and it emulates a little bit of the tone that comes from running through a nice analog console, right? There's goodness that happens there. I've not compared the two. This is just what comes with Studio One Pro, and this is what I've been using, and I kind of dig it. So it has essentially, what happens is, it puts it across my mix bus, but also across the sub mix buses, and possibly on the individual tracks. I honestly don't know. This pass-through has something to do with that. I just set it up, and when I turn this up, things feel a little bit warmer and a little bit darker. If you go all the way up, it gets to be a little like crunchy, and like the high frequencies go away entirely. But that's the way it works. Crosstalk is, if you're familiar with what crosstalk is in the real analog world, it is essentially that. It allows the different channels to bleed into each other. I'm sure there's some cool stuff that can happen from that, but I've always left that off. And then noise, you hear that? Introduces noise, which perhaps maybe does something interesting to the sound. I've tried it, trying to be cool. Like, I'm going to leave the noise on, but all it does is add noise, and I don't really hear it making the mix sound better. So I usually leave that off. The drive is the one that I use. And this is not like overdrive, like a distortion plugin, sorry, I got something in my mouth, which is something, you'll see me use quite a bit. Maybe not in this mix, but in general, I like distortion as a way to add extra character to individual tracks. But here, this is more just gentle drive, like saturation is more the way I would think about it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to hit play, and we'll go to kind of a bigger chorus section, and we will turn on this drive and turn it up, and you can just hear what it's doing. Make sure that you're listening on YouTube. The audio quality is a little better. Listen in HD. You'll be able to hear this a little bit better. So here we go. I'll start it up and turn it on and crank it up. We'll hear the differences.
Cease the need to be your prideful king or queen, having control, looking for the fool's gold, wandered off, lost and gone astray, tried to find a way to go, but oh, just come.
So turning it up all the way, we finally got to distortion at 18. What I have found, and it's more prominent in big rock mixes, but usually a little bit around just below 6 is where it tends to bring a little bit of extra roundness to the bottom end without affecting the top end too much. And so that's where I'm going to leave it, and we're going to listen. I'll turn it on and off, and we can see if we hear a difference. We may not, and that's fine too. But let's try that now.
Cease the need to be your prideful king or queen, having control, looking for the fool's gold, wandered off, lost and gone astray, tried to find.
It's almost like, it's pretty subtle, but to me, it's almost like it adds some extra depth to the bass without turning the bass up, and I don't think it's like a mid-range hump. I really do feel like it adds some kind of sort of perceived depth, if anything else. Deepness, literally like it sounds a little bit lower, fuller to me. So that's where I'm going to leave it, and we're just going to mix through that. So we're not going to touch that. We literally will never touch that again. And it'll be passing through. It'll affect how our mix sounds. Our bass will be running through that sort of sound as it comes through. So that's something that I do. I usually just set it and leave it alone. And to be honest, half the time I forget to turn it on, right? So it's not a make or break thing in the mix. To be completely honest, it's something I could totally live without, and I think I'd be okay. But we're going to leave it there, and we'll leave it on for the rest of the mix. Now, here's the thing that's probably more relevant to you and the kind of what we're doing here with Mix Together. And this is my mix bus processing. So as I've already mentioned, I believe I'm a fan of kind of this backwards mixing where we work on the buses first before we work on individual tracks. And occasionally, I have a sneaky suspicion things like these drum tracks, I may not do much, if anything, to the individual tracks. It may all be at the bus because it's such a simple song and the tracks sound okay. I'm not going to feel the need to go in and do a lot of stuff on individual tracks. That said, I've started doing this two compressor approach to my mix bus. The first acts like a standard mix bus compressor, 2-to-1 ratio, 30 millisecond attack and release, 100 millisecond release, adding a dB of makeup gain. And then this one is a multi-band compressor, same settings, same ratio, same threshold, of 100 millisecond attack and release, and then the 3 bands. And essentially, the first one is just doing what a normal compressor does. It warms the mix up a little bit to me, even more so than what we've done with the console shaper thing. But then the multi-band compressor kind of tames the mid-range a little bit. So it tames the mids, which is where the bulk of the information in your mix is, especially vocals, guitars, rhythm instruments. They're all in that mid-range. And it kind of compresses the lows, mids, and highs separately. So if the mid-range gets really loud, it compresses the mid-range, but it lets the lows and the highs come through. What I found is by using this on my mix bus, it allows me to have mixes that have a little bit more punch and a little bit more clarity without clouding things up too much in the mid-range. My mixes tend to come out a little darker. I like darker. I thought this would help me get a little bit more clarity and a little bit more brightness out of there, and it has, and so I've kept it. As with everything I suggest to you, try it yourself and see if it works with your style of mixing and with the way that you work. Some of the things won't work for you. They'll work for me and not for you, or you may not like the sound that I get with it. It's completely fine. It's up to you to try these things out in your system, and if you like some of them and they work for you, incorporate them into your workflow, and if you don't, and that's okay too. All right, so first we're going to hit play, and I will turn on this compressor, the first compressor in the chain, and we'll see what that sounds like. Let me rewind just a little bit.
So seize the need to be your prideful king or queen, having control. So seize the need to be your prideful king or queen, having control. So seize the need to be your prideful king or queen, having control. Looking for the fool's gold, wandered on.
It's a single band compressor, so the low end is the thing that's going to trigger it the most because we don't have it pulled down super low. So when the bass comes through, boom, it's going to trigger it down, and so it's going to do a little tiny bit of that pumping that's going to make the mix sound a little bit warmer, a little bit darker, which is kind of cool. And then we kind of follow that up with this multi-band, which is going to kind of do a little bit of the opposite. It's going to take the mid-range and take care of that and let the lows and highs come through. And so we end up with a cool combination of both. So I'll hit play, let you hear it, and then I'll turn on the multi-band. You can hear what that does.
So seize the need to be your prideful king or queen, having control. Looking for the fool's gold, wandered off, lost and gone astray, tried to find a way to go, but oh, just come home. So seize the need to be your prideful king or queen, having control.
So it just, to me, it almost gives it a little more width. I know it's not technically doing that, but because most of the bulk of the sound is coming from the middle with the vocal and the drums and the bass, and by those kind of drums and bass, especially the vocal being the mid-range heavy instrument, it's taming those down. So some of the brighter stuff on the sides is coming out a little more. So it feels like it kind of is adding a little width, a little more clarity. The vocal has a lot more brightness to it now. Maybe a little too much, but it's got that clarity that I think we need. And this is just from the processing we're doing on the mix bus, which means we won't have to do as much on the individual vocal buses either. One other thing, let's just listen to turning these both on and off together and see the difference that it makes overall. So we'll start with it off, and then I'll turn them both on together.
So seize the need to be your prideful king or queen, having control, looking for the fool's gold, wandered off, lost and gone astray, tried to find the way to go, but oh, just come home.
I don't like it when people do demonstrations and they tell you what to listen for before you listen to it. So now you're totally biased. So I let you hear it first. I'm going to do it again and tell you what I'm hearing and what I like about this. This is kind of, if you've heard me or you probably heard Graham Cochran talk about the idea of doing a lot of processing on the buses first, top-down mixing, backwards mixing. This is a great example of what it does. It is killing so many birds with these two stones. I'm sorry, I know that's violent. That it's going to make life a lot easier on the other chain. So there's a couple things I hear. First of all, the bass feels much more under control. Remember during the static mix how I said the bass is cool, but we're losing it. We hear it jump out and then it disappears. It already feels more present because of the combination of compressors we're using. Now, we're not doing tons of compression. It's just a few dB on each, if that, but it's enough to tighten things up. The other thing is everything feels more like a finished mix even now with the compression that's added. It goes from feeling like there's a little excessive mid-range to it feels like a bunch of kind of jumbled different instruments to everything feels a little more glued together, a little tighter, a little crisper, almost like I can pick things out a little more, and they're all kind of less up here and down here and more kind of together and a part of a cohesive whole. Those are some of the things that I heard. So I'm going to turn them off, turn my microphone off, hit play again, and then turn it on. So I'll let it play through the chorus progression a full time, then I'll turn the compressors on, and you'll listen for how the vocals seem to be contained better, the bass feels like it's contained more, and the instruments seem to have a little more clarity, all because of just these two plugins on our mix bus. Here we go.
So seize the need to be your prideful king or queen, having control, looking for the fool's gold, wandered off, lost and gone astray, tried to find the way to go, but oh, just come home. Seize the need to be your prideful king.
Couple things I hear. It's not perfect, right? It hasn't solved all our problems. Mix isn't done. I'm not going to send it off now. But it has solved more problems than it's introduced. The one problem I feel like it's introduced is the vocals feel a little too crispy now. And also that may have a little more compression on that mix on the multi-band than I would like. However, I know that the reason the multi-band is hitting so hard is because there is so much mid-range material and we've yet to do any EQ. So I will be going to some of those guitars especially and taking some of that excessive mid-range out, which will in turn decrease the amount of mid-range hitting that multi-band compressor, which means a couple hours from now or a couple episodes from now when we've gotten more to a finished mix, chances are I'm going to open up this multi-band compressor and it's not going to be hitting as hard because I tend to mix from a subtractive standpoint where I'm taking things away more so than adding them in. And there will be less mid-range in the mix, which means this multi-band compressor won't be working as hard. So if anything, we may be going a little more aggressive with these two, knowing that we're going to take a lot of that mid-range out and probably make it to where these compressors aren't working quite as hard down the road. But I really like what these compressors are doing. I think it sounds really great, and I'm kind of excited about it. So this is a nice... I took more time on that because I really wanted to show that, and this is a great song to show that on because it's simple, but you're able to really hear the differences between the two. If you didn't hear any differences and you're feeling weird about that, it's completely okay. There were plenty of times when I was learning all this stuff where someone would say, listen to that difference, and I'd be like, yeah, it sounds amazing, but I didn't hear anything. It's part of it's developing your ears, part of it depends on where you're listening, Part of it is streaming audio doesn't sound as good as if you were sitting here and you don't hear it as well. So I recognize that all of those are the case. Tip, listen in HD. 1080p HD is the best quality you'll get on YouTube. Changing the quality of the video also changes the quality of the audio. So if you're listening at like 480, none of the audio is going to sound all that great, so you won't hear a lot of this. So make sure you listen in HD. And also, go back and listen to those sections again where I was turning it on and off. Listen in your studio, on your studio monitors, on nicer headphones, whatever you have, and really pay attention to what's changing. What I would do is listen to just the bass. Like listen for the bass and listen for how it's different. Then rewind and do it again and listen just for the snare, maybe, or the vocals. Listen to the vocals, and then listen to the guitars, and listen to how each of them sounds different. And just kind of take note of that. You're not going to get it all in one day, but you'll start to get these little wrinkles in your brain where you're starting to save this information, and it'll slowly over time, the more you do this, piece itself together. The other thing you can do is to download these tracks, which you have available over at my website, link below, homestudiocorner.com/MT. Sign up, get the tracks, import them, do the rough mix and get it sounding close to what I have, and then put these plugins on there yourself and use the same settings or close to the same settings and get roughly the same amount of gain reduction, and then you turn them on and off and listen. That way you can listen to whatever section of the song you want, and you can start to hear those differences. If you still don't hear the difference, it's okay. Just lay off of this. Maybe just use the first compressor, not the second one, and just do your best and do what you can. It's kind of like guitar players. When you first start, you just don't know a whole lot, and so like you may be focused on playing that G chord correctly, and you really don't hear that the guitar's out of tune. It's those types of things. Whereas 10 years down the road, someone plays an out of tune guitar, you almost can't listen to anything else until they tune it because you've become so accustomed to knowing what an in-tune guitar sounds like. That's kind of what we're talking about here. It's like playing guitar. There's just a lot more buttons. Okay? All right, thanks for watching this video. Hope it was fun and helpful for you. It was fun for me. I'll see you in the next one.